Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours with Michael Kitces, or as you can see from a little bit of the background here, Airport Hours with Michael Kitces. So I want to talk this week about advisory firms, buying advisory firms. So Chuck sent me a question this week. How do I find practices in my area that want to be purchased? Right? Like, I'm a buyer. How do I find the sellers? And there's just been a huge uptick in interest on this. I find our whole advisory community over the past couple of years. I think really driven by a few things. One, just firms are getting larger. So we have some of the best data in the RIA community. You look at the RIA benchmarking studies, and 15 years ago, the average advisory firm had $20 million under management. By 2008, it had $100 million under management. By 2014, we're up to $200 million under management as the average firm. And so as advisory firms grow bigger, some interesting effects happen. As you grow from 20 million to 100 million, you inevitably have to grow beyond just the single solo practitioner owner. You start adding in other advisors, lots of staff, additional infrastructure, particularly the growth from 100 million to 200 million almost always includes the introduction of a new partner, additional people to the firm, multiple advisors, multiple support staff. And so as the firms get bigger, I've watched a whole lot of advisory firms all go through this process. You evolve the firm beyond the founder to be able to add in additional advisors, to add in more clients, to have more capacity to build the infrastructure. And then as you do that enough, eventually everybody gets to the same point, like, geez, I could add in another advisor. Like, I could go acquire one. It'd be really easy because I've already got all the infrastructure. Let's go acquire advisors. And so more and more firms have been going this direction of saying, hey, we build all the infrastructure. Let's go add advisors to it. And I find, frankly, just the larger the firm, the more they seem to be interested. So firms with a couple $100 million are interested. Billion-dollar firms are even more interested. Pinnacle Advisory Group, our firm, has done 3 acquisitions in the past 4 years. More and more interest in acquisitions across the spectrum. And I think actually this is fed by 2 pieces. So number one is just this effect where as firms get larger, they're more capable of doing the acquisitions because they've just built the staff and infrastructure already. The second effect that goes along with it, I think, is our organic growth rates are slowing. I mean, if you look at advisory firms in the aggregate, you strip out the market growth, and you just look at actual organic growth of net flows, advisory firm growth seems to be slowing. I think part of that is just there aren't as many unattached clients now as there were in the past. I see this in our own firm. Our approach talks years ago would be like us, a person working with someone in an independent broker dealer and their brother-in-law who sells life insurance and sort of gives advice on the side. It would be like us against some folks that were more product-based or insurance-based, and we had a full-on advice offering, and just we won most of the client business. Now when we go out there, it's typically us and several other firms in our area who do advice, who I know and I respect, and I don't have anything negative to say about them. And I might say, well, we're a little different because we do advice this way and they do it that way. And so there are some minor differences, but we've gotten so similar to each other. And the clients are, at best, better at identifying advisors, and at worst, already work with another advisor. So we're not just trying to peel away a client from a salesperson who doesn't give advice. We're peeling away from actual advisors. And so just there are a few clients available. We have, I think, a little bit of this crisis of differentiation because we're all trying to do the same thing for the same group of people and can't differentiate ourselves. And so as the firms get larger, but the organic growth rates slow down, and you're looking at all this infrastructure to acquire firms instead, and it feels like, geez, it'd be easier to buy a firm at 20 or 50 or $100 million at a time than just trying to get new clients, one client at a time. Let's go buy. So that combination of factors has led to some interesting shifts in the industry. The prediction for a long time was that we'd have this giant wave of advisors all approaching retirement. The baby boomer wave is now moving into retirement. The average age of advisors is mid-50s or so and creeping older. And so there's supposed to be this giant wave of sellers as all advisors moved into retirement. And instead, what we're finding when we look at platforms like FP Transitions, one of the biggest marketplaces for advisors, what they're finding is that when a seller lists on their platform, they get 50 buyers interested for every seller. 50-to-1 ratio. So in theory, we're supposed to have this selling wave, and then in practice, the marketplace, like, it's a seller's market. You're you're the popular date if you're actually selling right now. Overwhelming number of buyers, very, very few sellers. And I think part of that is because we're all discovering, like, advising is one of those businesses. As I like to say, you can die with your boots on, like a cowboy that just goes to the end. The advising is, frankly, like, it's not an intense manual labor kind of business. As long as the brain still is functioning and you like having relationships, it's a very rewarding business. It's rewarding personally, it's rewarding financially. Given what firms get paid to sell, particularly for solo practice, the reality for most firms is you will have more take-home pay in the next 3 years to keep your practice than you will to sell it. And if you do that, not only do you get the 3 years of income that's worth more, but 3 years from now, you still own the business, so you can sell it then. Except you get 3 years out, and then the math is still the same. It's worth more to stay 3 years than sell it, and you keep repeating that, and you never leave. And so the wave just hasn't come. Now, maybe as advisors keep getting older and older, eventually the age wave will start to show up. There's some discussion of whether DOL fiduciary may be a catalyst for selling, although frankly, the firms that are selling in DOL fiduciary are the very product-centric, transaction-oriented firms. They're not the firms you actually want to buy as an advisor. I mean, maybe if you can get them on the cheap and teach these clients about real advice, that's great, but the ones most likely to be pushed out by DOL fiduciary are the ones that are the least advice-centric, which is not what you want to buy as an advice-centric firm. So given that dynamic in this like horribly unbalanced marketplace, like where do you go to find sellers? So you can start, there are a couple of platform businesses that have been trying to build to serve this space. The biggest one, at least that I'm aware of, is FP Transitions. There are a couple others in this area, RIA Match, Succession Link, a number that have tried to be these platforms pairing together buyers and sellers. Now, still the challenge to this is the buyers overwhelm the sellers. And of course, since the buyers know about these marketplaces, that though they may actually be the most crowded places where you get the most buyer inquiries for every seller, because the platforms are struggling for sellers and buyers are looking for sellers and there aren't very many places to go, so they concentrate on these platforms. But it's at least an option you should be aware of. I think number two is you look on your own platform. So whether you're an REA at a custodian, whether you're a registered rep at a broker-dealer, look to your own platforms as well. Most of the broker-dealer and custodian platforms have created their own internal marketplaces. Some promote them more effectively than others, but almost all of them have them. They want to be a matchmaker. Often they'll make it easier to transition within the platform. If you buy the firm, you don't have to repaper the accounts in the same way. You may just have to change rep codes or broker of record dynamics, so it's easier to do the transition, which means the clients are more likely to retain, so it has more economic value. And frankly, the platforms want to do it, because if you're a platform and you see a bunch of your advisors about to retire, as a platform, you can either facilitate internal introductions, or you can watch the clients and the assets leave when the person ends up selling to an advisor outside the community. So frankly, the custodians, broker-dealers have an own financial self-interest to see these transitions happen internally, so they want to be matchmakers as best they can. Likewise, you can go to your broker-dealer or custodian conferences and see who's there, right? Because if you imagine it from the seller's perspective, if you wanted to sell and you wanted to find good buyers, where would you go? You go with your peers are, right? You go to those custodian broker-dealer conferences. So the math still isn't in your favor. This makes dating at bars look favorable by comparison on the mismatch of men and women are now buyers and sellers. But there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in just going, imagine where the seller would go and try to be there. Now, because the marketplaces are so kind of buyer-centric, I think realistically, most advisors that are going to find good deals, particularly if you want to buy a firm locally, is to network locally, to look locally. And that's good old boots on the ground, beat the streets networking kind of stuff. Like I don't know that there's any magic formula around that. Again, recognize, so if you're a local who wants to sell, how would you find your local buyers? So maybe you go to local FPA chapter meetings, NAPFA study groups, IMCA regional events, right? Like you go to the associations that tend to concentrate advisors together and look there. Maybe you just network with some of your own peers and colleagues. So there's just a sheer word of mouth effect. Who do you know who's looking to buy? Who do you know who's looking to sell? And if you have enough of those conversations, you may get a match, you may get an introduction. So it's not the most elegant or efficient of networking processes, but that's just the reality. Like if you want to be a buyer in a marketplace where there's 50 buyers for every seller, you're going to have to do some ground hustle if you really want to get a deal done. Now, the other reason actually why I think it's a good opportunity to look within kind of these common groups, so FPA members look for fellow FPA members, NAFA members look for fellow NAFA members, broker-dealer folks look for people within their broker-dealer, ditto for the custodians. It increases the likelihood that you get a fit. The reality is advisory firms don't transition well. It's not a good deal if there's not really a good philosophical match. If an investment-centric firm gets bought by a planning-centric firm, they try to roll out planning, and the investment-centric clients say, what the heck is all this? We're here for the returns. And it's not a good match. And ditto vice versa, right? If a planning-centric firm gets bought by an investment-centric firm, they're all going to leave when they realize they're not getting financial planning service anymore. And product-centric firms aren't going to match if you're on the AUM model. And if you're an active firm, don't go buy a DFA firm. If you're a DFA firm, you really want another DFA firm to buy you because that's a good philosophical fit. Because again, if there's not alignment of investment and planning philosophy between the buyer and the seller, the clients will reject the match, right? And ultimately, the clients can rule. Clients control. If the clients aren't happy with the match, the clients will leave. If the clients will leave, the seller loses money, the buyer loses money, depending on how the deal was structured. Like everybody loses out. The deal is just going to get priced lower if there's more retention risk. So those philosophical matches are crucial, which again is why I think looking to those association groups, platforms, whatever it is, wherever your nexus of common advisors is in the first place, that's the best place to look for sellers. It's still going to be a crowded marketplace, but at least you're likely that if you find a match, it'll be a fit, right? Because your challenge if you go to a marketplace like FP Transitions, and nothing against them, but there's so many buyers from so many different angles. A lot of this is just filtering to find the match. And you may find a match if you're shopping there as a buyer, if you found the right seller who says, oh, you, Mr. Buyer, you are the exact perfect fit for me. But that's a hard matching process. And if you start in a pool that's more similar to you in the first place, I think you're more likely to find fits and and spend a little bit less time, basically doing inefficient dating for bad matches, right? Like for anybody who's in or remembers the dating game, like lots of bad first dates is really painful. So finding some efficiency by focusing there, I think is helpful. Phil, you asked a good question. Importance of custodial relationships with buyouts. Particularly on the RIA side around custodians, like I have to admit, it's not a huge deal killer. I mean, it can be done. Certainly when you just look at the reality from the perspective of clients, right? Repapering all the accounts, doing all the transfers is certainly a pain, not a very positive thing. You increase the risk of client attrition, you increase the risk that clients will transition. So it's easier if you can either find someone on your platform, or frankly, what I've seen many firms do is, if you're a Schwab firm and you acquire someone on the TDA platform, now you're a Schwab and TDA firm. I've seen a lot of firms actually expand their custodial footprint using the acquisition as kind of a reason or an excuse. Again, if you're at a certain size where you've got some staff and infrastructure so you can cross-train them on different systems, that's not necessarily a deal killer. I think if you're a smaller advisory firm and you're running solo or with a very lean staff, learning multiple custodians and running multiple custodial relationships at once is a painful inefficiency for the business, so I'd watch out for that. But at a certain size, I don't know, probably $200 or $300 million. We see firms starting to look at being multi-custodial at $500 million plus. I see it more and more commonly. So sometimes the acquisition is the entree into being multi-custodial in the first place. I don't know that that's a great virtue. Again, there are some inefficiencies. I know a few firms that like it because they can kind of play them off of each other, right? They go to Schwab and say, here's the deal that TD Ameritrade's getting me, and then they go to T Ameritrade and say, here's the deal that Schwab's giving me, and from the independent advisor perspective, playing your vendors off of each other. Maybe there's a little bit of negotiating leverage, but as many of you know, if you're in the custodial world, there's also the leverage of just getting better service teams and more access to decision makers by being a larger firm on that platform. If you spread your assets amongst multiple platforms, you're a smaller fish in everybody's pond rather than a big fish in one pond that gets you a little bit more service. So kind of the challenges of single custodian versus multi-custodian is probably a discussion unto itself. But getting back to your original question, Phil, no, I don't think it's a deal killer looking across other platforms, but I think there's no question it's easier, just mechanically easier to close the deal and mechanically easier to transition the clients, which improves retention and the economic value if you can find someone on your platform or you're willing to expand into the platform where the acquired firm was and will continue to be. Just minimizing client disruption is generally a good thing for retention. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and wrap up today. Thanks for hanging out with me for Office Hours with Michael Kitces, or Airport Hours with Michael Kitces this month. We try for 1 p.m. East Coast time every Tuesday. We've missed that out for a couple weeks, unfortunately, with my travel schedule, but we'll get back onto that regular agenda soon. In any event, thanks for following me on Twitter and Periscope here so you can get the latest updates when we're broadcasting. Hope this is helpful food for thought, and have a great day, everyone. Take care.